Beware spoilers for the group stages of the mid-season brawl in this particular video. Hello everyone, Nubkeks here. In today's video I want to talk about one of the biggest surprises that came out of the mid-season brawl tournament we saw happening last week. Because going into the tournament, if you had told me that arguably the best player in the world on arguably the best team in the world, Gen.G Rich playing on Gen.G Esports, would start picking up Sergeant Hammer in some of their tournament games, I probably wouldn't have believed you.
You want to kind of avoid fights.
Oh my. Oh my.
Oh boy. Bringing out literally the sieging heavy artillery here.
However, that is exactly what happened. And not just once, not just twice, but several times over the course of the tournament, Sergeant Hammer was either picked or banned away against Gen.G Esports.
They don't teach you this in AIT.
I mean, the sneaking suspicion is, of course, that, well, maybe Gen.G picked it up in games that they were certain that they would win. They're kind of trolling or trying to hide strategies. And I mean, they picked it against Mindfreak. They're one of the weakest teams in the world that were in the tournament. So there, yeah, maybe you're a little bit suspicious. But they also picked it against Tempo Storm, the best team in North America. They picked it against Tempest, the second best team from Korea. And then Dignitas, the best team in EU, actually banned Sergeant Hammer against Gen.G twice. So when you take those things into consideration, oh, and of course, add on top the fact that they won the games where they played Sergeant Hammer against these, absolute top teams in the world, I think we have to take the pick pretty seriously. So what I want to dive into in this video is why Gen.G picked Sergeant Hammer, when they picked it, and what they comboed with it or what they were looking to use it against.
Ready to roll out.
So first things first, let me put the three drafts that Gen.G put together. We'll look at them in isolation from the map or the enemy team comps first, and let's just look at what they did, because there's some very important and unique things going on here that made the Sergeant Hammer work. Number one, and very straightforward thing to note, is that they pick Sergeant Hammer every single time at the very, very end of the draft. It's not one of the first heroes they pick up. They don't leave room for it to be countered, because Sergeant Hammer does have some very, very serious counters. Instead, they pick it right at the end where they got a very good idea of what the enemy team is setting up. The second thing I think is probably the most important thing, which is that they're setting up a totally different type of team comp from the traditional Sergeant Hammer comp that we've seen. Normally you associate Hammer with the Protect the Hammer composition, which is, okay, we'll get Sergeant Hammer to siege up. She's got super long range, so we'll put this big beefy wall of frontliners in front of her. We'll probably give her a Lieutenant Morales who can just heal, stim drone her up. We might give her another support as well, just to keep her alive. It will just put everything into keeping Sergeant Hammer safe and letting her just attack stuff in siege mode. And I think that's actually been one of the problems with Sergeant Hammer, right? Because, well, there's so many ways to deal with that. There's so many ways to shut it down. The really interesting thing that Gen.G does, and this is also, you can adapt this mindset, by the way, guys. You can adapt this mindset to just how you think about tanking, just in general, right? But what they did, it's a different type of Protect the Hammer. Instead of protecting the hammer by giving her a whole load of defensive tools, putting a whole lot of walls between Hammer and the enemy team, instead what Gen.G is doing in so many of these matches is they protect the hammer by giving the enemy team multiple targets that they really, really want to focus. Look at Gen.G versus Mindfreak. Genji, Zeratul, Karazim, and a Diablo to go with the Sergeant Hammer. They're not giving any protection much to the Sergeant Hammer at all. This is all about diving in aggressively. And they have these multiple squishy melee heroes that, if you look at any of them on their own, you of course go, oh yeah, Genji dives in amongst your team. You want to focus Genji down. Well, same thing, Karazim dives in to get some damage out. Oh, you want to focus Karazim. Zeratul as well. Oh, Zeratul's attacking our backline. How do we counter this? Oh, it's super valuable to counter Zeratul. There's so many of these squishy heroes. There's so many targets that you want to focus that there's just simply no time to focus the Sergeant Hammer. The other massive aspect of this comp as well is that Gen.G is relying, and this is important because this will be a drawback. This is going to be something that, any of us will struggle to do in our games, but they're relying on their just incredible, just otherworldly ability to coordinate as a team. Because what happens is when these guys go in with all these squishy heroes, the enemy team, each of the heroes that Gen.G has here, they want to target, they want to focus them down. It's very easy for that team to split focus, for one person to notice the Karazim and go, oh, I'm going to target Karazim, whereas another person notices the Zeratul and they focus the Zeratul a little bit. It splits that focus, it spreads that damage out, whereas Gen.G going in with their coordination Full focus fire from a Zeratul, a Genji, Karazim with 7-sided strikes and iron fists, then follow it up with Sergeant Hammer with the blunt force gun. Very easy for them with their coordination to guarantee a kill because they have so much damage output. And then once they get that one kill, that Sergeant Hammer range, it's so much more difficult to punish her there, and then they can use that as a tool to snowball. In Genji versus Tempo Storm, you can see they're going with a sort of similar idea, right? They still have that Zeratul, that melee assassin. This time they have a Junkrat instead of the Genji. You know, it doesn't have quite the same identity. You still do have that divey burst damage with the Riptire from Junkrat, but it's definitely not on the same level, right? They also have Malfurion instead of Karazim, and interestingly enough, this is one of the most difficult games that Genji had when they were running the Hammer. Finally, looking at Genji versus Tempest, again we see Genji being used in combination with Hammer and that Karazim as well. Alright, let's turn around, let's look at the enemy team. What is Genji looking to counter with this Hammer? And there's some very, very distinct trends which might prove useful to you in your own games. Okay, so going up against Mind Freak, we see that they're picking Hammer against a Garrosh. Jump over to versus Tempo Storm. They're picking Hammer again against Garrosh. Jump over to Tempest. What do we see on the enemy team? Why, yes, you guessed it. The enemy team has a Garrosh. So this is one of the heroes that they believe that Sergeant Hammer is really good against, that she's really good against Garrosh. I think this is understandable why. Sergeant Hammer, especially when she's in siege mode, she has a very large knockback which you can use against that Garrosh engage. Garrosh has to go into melee to throw someone back with his E. Sergeant Hammer provides a very reliable counter to that. She can poke away that Garrosh safely from range without truly investing anything. And then you have the Blunt Force Gun Heroic, which when you combo with those divey melee assassins that they always run with her, you can get damage onto the backline as well, even if you are fairly far back, zoning out the Garrosh and being zoned out yourself effectively in the team fight. Also very important to note that Rich always takes that Unstoppable talent at level 4, so he can activate his E in siege mode when the Garrosh comes close. Gives him Unstoppable, means that Garrosh is not able to hit him with the Q and then get that E off before Rich can knock him back. He can always pop Unstoppable preemptively and then get the knockback off, or just zip away with his boosters. The other thing that I would draw from this as well is that they definitely seem to be very, very wary of playing Sergeant Hammer into a Maiev. In the first game against Mind Freak, they're picking Hammer when Mind Freak only have a healer left to pick. There's simply no way that they can pick the Maiev. Against Tempo Storm, they've actually first banned the Maiev away, and against Tempest, again, they have second banned the Maiev. So they're never picking Sergeant Hammer in a situation where Maiev can come in. One note that we don't actually see in any of these games, but I think is still worth noting, is that Sergeant Hammer also struggles against heroes like Li Ming or Chromie, especially these skill shot mages with long range, because, well, they can hit Hammer at long range. Hammer is big, Hammer's fairly slow, she can be an easy target. So they also don't pick her in a situation where the enemy team has an opportunity to pick those heroes either. Again, it's not something explicit from these drafts, but I think it is a fairly safe inference from what we know about Hammer already. In terms of the talent build for Hammer, and again, you can probably work out a few of these little bits from the stuff I've been saying in terms of how she's picked and how she's going to be played. We're going to pick talents that make her fit very much into that more aggressive type composition. So let's take a little look here. Level 1, we're going to go for Ambush. Gain stealth when entering siege mode, or after not taking or dealing damage for 3 seconds while in siege mode. Basic attacks while stealth deal 100% more damage. This ties into that melee assassin, very mobile type team comp that they're going to be playing. Hammer's going to be moving in and out of siege mode an awful lot. She's not going to be sitting in siege mode for a very long time. It gives that extra little bit of burst, gives an extra little bit of poke, and that's what they're looking for there. At level 4, we're going to go for Siege Tactics. Using Neo Steel Plating while in siege mode grants Unstoppable for 2 seconds. This is going to be crucial to ensure that survivability against the Garrosh. At level 7, Hover Siege Mode is the choice, letting Hammer move at 40% while in siege mode. This is often comboed with Karazim, who can give bonus movement speed for an extra little boost here, so you get a bit more value out of it. It lets her get value out of that ambush a bit more consistently. It lets her use the Unstoppable at level 4 and then move out of some of those attacks. So it's just a pretty flexible tool to go with a very, very mobile composition. At level 10, interestingly, they go for Blunt Force Gun, which does a large missile across the battlefield after a little bit of a wind-up. And this is very, very important because this does a large chunk of burst damage, and this is used in combination with these dive-type heroes to secure a kill. So this is crucial. Comboing this, using it in coordination with your team, is absolutely key if you're going to be running this the way that Gen.G does. At level 13 then, we're going for hyper cooling engines. While in siege mode, hitting heroes with basic attacks reduces the cooldown of thrusters by 5 seconds. One of the really interesting tricks with Hammer is, of course, activating her thrusters will instantly put you out of siege mode, right? Normally siege mode, if you cancel it with the button, it does have an animation. When you activate thrusters, you instantly leave, and you have that 60% bonus move speed for 4 seconds. It's pretty damn important. The nice thing about hyper cooling engines, of course, is that it gives you those thrusters much more frequently and makes it much harder to counter. You've got a lot more mobility to play with, and it does, of course, combo very nicely with that hover siege mode, where you can kind of get in range and get a few more basic attacks off. Then you have those thrusters to reposition. You can hop in, get that ambush attack off again. You're not being overly punished for leaving siege mode because that ambush gives you that bonus whenever you do. At level 16, Rich usually goes for a Giant Killer. Basic attacks against enemy heroes do an extra 1.5% maximum health bonus. Again, I think this is pretty nice against the Garrosh. It ignores his armor, so it gives you that extra pressure against him, which is pretty fantastic. And it's just a very nice and consistent damage output increase, which isn't reliant on any fancy tricks. Level 20, then they usually craft the Orbital BFG. And I think this is going to be even more useful in your own games, where games will typically last longer than they do at pro level play. This makes your blunt force gun orbit the planet every 5 seconds, and it just gives you consistent pressure down the lane. It can keep clearing out minions, and it will just wear down keeps. It will keep pressure on core and get a whole bunch of XP and map presence for your team. So there you guys go. That's a little bit of a look at Sergeant Hammer and the very unique take that Rich and Gen.G Esports had on the hero. What do you think about Sergeant Hammer? Have you seen her more recently in your games since Gen.G pulled this out at the Mid-Season Brawl Tournament? Let me know down below as well what sort of experience you have when you play Sergeant Hammer, and stay tuned in the next couple of days because I will try to get some Sergeant Hammer gameplay up for you guys to look, where I get to try out the build myself and see how it fares. Thanks everyone so much for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy the video, and I'll see you all next time for more Heroes of the Storm. Bye bye.